I was working on another film in Berlin, and Neil and Stephen Woolley came out to visit me, and I think that because I'd worked with Moira Buffini before on Tamara Drew, and she started writing Byzantium, the film, while we were shooting that, and I think she'd suggested to Neil that I should play Clara. So they came over, and I read the script and went, "Oh my God, I have to do it. It's so right. It's so me." and then we went from there. I expressed how much I wanted to do it, and they said, "Well, we want you to do it," and it worked that way. And that was really at the beginning of the whole development process, really. And then Saoirse came on board, and the film changed. The screenplay changed a lot. But yeah, it was very flattering to be, approached at the beginning. It's nice because then you can develop together, and you become very passionate about the project because you work, very intimately on it. She doesn't trust men at all, and I think she's conditioned to not need them, and so she's very reluctant. She doesn't need anyone. She's very self-sufficient. The only person she needs is her daughter. When the daughter goes, I think that's when she maybe can start thinking about it. I think again it's just she is like an animal. She's like a predator. She doesn't think about the present. She just thinks about the future. We're going here, we're going here, we're going here, we're going here, and to settle down is just not an option for her. She's very multifaceted. She's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. She's ferocious and loving and maternal and deadly and strong, and at the same time totally vulnerable. So it was all these contradictions that I liked, and it felt like a very personal project for me. This mother-daughter relationship thing was something I really could relate to. So that's really what it was that drew me in, that relationship. You have to do a lot of research, and actually that was one of the things I sat down and spoke about with Neil and Moira, is the world, the journey that she has been on, what she'd been doing throughout the ages. And it was quite fun that, what did she do in the 40s? What did she do during the war? What did she do in Victorian times? And so I came up with all these different life stories that she'd lived with her daughter, which we could then bring in very subtly into little things that they carried around with them, or there were songs that I sang which were from certain eras. But then at the same time, my particular character is totally doesn't live in the past at all, and is very, very forward thinking. So as much as I had to do all this research, I had to forget it as well. So she's very contemporary in that sense. But yeah, it was fun because I love that aspect of the pre-production, all the research. It's great. I think we were both really busy shooting, and then we had this sort of couple of days in London where we met up with Neil and sort of just rehearsed a couple of scenes and spoke a lot. And then we went away, and then we didn't see each other again till maybe 2 days before the shoot. But luckily, Saoirse and I had just this natural chemistry with one another. She's so open and grown up, but at the same time like a really giggly teenager. Oh, that time she was only 16. And we just had this natural chemistry, and we didn't have to try too hard. And I think because I have a younger sister and a mother that's not too much older than me, sort of, I naturally felt quite, I naturally started to mother her, but it was more like a sister-sister relationship, to be honest, most of the time. And she's such a wonderful actress. She makes it very, very easy, really exquisite.
I became involved in the film when Neil brought the script to me. We had been trying to work together for a few years before that, and it just hadn't really worked out, time-wise and all that stuff. And he sent me the script, and I was a bit worried at first because I thought, before I had read the script, I thought, it's another vampire film. It was right in the midst of all the Twilight madness and everything. And I wasn't sure if being part of that kind of trend was a good thing, but then I read it and I saw that really I don't really think of it as a vampire film at all. It is a big part of it, and it certainly does affect the relationship between these two characters, but I think it's more about that. So what drew me to Eleanor was the fact that she's 200 years old and she's still 16, and she's very weighted. She's got a very kind of heavy burden, just from the past, just from not really knowing what happened to her, you know. And she's a storyteller as well, and we see at the start of the film that she's writing down her story and trying to tell the truth as fully as she can, but there's something that's being kept from her, and I think that kind of gives her this state of sort of melancholy the whole way through the film. Because it wasn't her choice to become a vampire in the first place. I mean, her mother saved her. She was dying when she was turned into a suppliant. But it wasn't necessarily her choice, and she was very young and very naive at the time and didn't really know what was going on, but trusted her mother. And now, you know, 200 years later, they're the same. They're in limbo. They're, you know, floating from one era to the next, and they can't have a relationship or anything like that. So I think she's always trying to, as I say, justify her killing, and she only wants to kill people who are ready and willing to die. So she'll mainly kill old people. She goes into hospitals to kill them, and at the time, like when we shot it, I thought it was a bit weird, you know. Just when I was doing it, I found it a bit odd. But then I saw it on screen and it worked so beautifully, and it was very unnerving. He is kind of life and death in a way. He's dying, but he still holds on to whatever life he has left. I mean, he's very sick, and I think for her, the reason why she's so attracted to him is because she has the opportunity to give him eternal life, and that's something for her that I think could help her live with what she has to do a little bit more. 'Cause she's always trying to justify it. She's always trying to justify killing people. I think when they arrive in the seaside town, it's a real reminder of the past for both of them. And for Eleanor, that's something that makes her more enthusiastic and more curious about really finding out what happened and the whole story of their beginning as a vampire. Whereas Clara is a bit frustrated by it. I think she's quite unnerved, and that comes out through frustration and anger. And you know, she was a prostitute, so she starts to get back into prostitution again, and that's something that Eleanor really has a problem with, because Eleanor is quite classy. Eleanor is very much an old soul and holds on to as much dignity as she can.
The main characters are Saoirse and Gemma's. They play sisters, or maybe mother and daughter. Gemma's character is working as a prostitute, and Saoirse's a schoolgirl. And it sort of turns out that they're both about 150 odd years old. And it's sort of version of a vampire, but without the teeth. It's more like a mix between vampires and Highlander or something like that, I guess. And I play an old naval Lieutenant Darville, who turns Gemma into a vampire, but women aren't really allowed to be vampires. And she's been on the run for 150 years, while me and my brotherhood are coming looking for him. Well, he has more of a conscience, and he doesn't see there being, you know, so much of a problem having a woman as part of the Brotherhood. But the Brotherhood are a bit like a golf club or something, you know, they don't like women there and spoiling their fun. But he's a bit more progressive vampire. He falls ill in the 1700s or whatever it is, I think. And he's desperate to stay alive, so he starts investigating into, you know, old books and ancient parchments to try and work out a way of prolonging his life. He's heard rumors or whatever about, this coven of men. So he's obviously willing to sacrifice other people in order to prolong his existence. The concept is still that one drinks to stay alive. But instead of fangs, when you get hot for blood or whatever, your thumb turns into a sort of talon and you use your nail to slice the neck. Darville meets Clara on a beach when she's a very young girl. And he's fond of her or whatever at that age, or sees something, innocent about her. And my friend, Riven, carries her off and has his wicked way with her. And makes her a whore, basically, sort of, which is what her, her existence is. And then when I return as a vampire, Riven is with her. She's, now I've been a prostitute for however many years, 10 years. And I like the idea that maybe a woman could be one of us, because they can prey on those that probably deserve to die rather than drinking from the innocent. Weirdly, it's quite often the very talented ones are often the nicest, probably because they've got less to prove or something like that. But no, they're good fun. They take the piss out of you, which is always nice. And they're brilliant. I'd had an accident at home in Berlin and nearly cut my toe off. So I was laid up for months. I couldn't work. I wasn't really getting any offers either. It's been a very quiet time. And someone I think someone was meant to play my part before me. And he couldn't do it. So I went to meet Neil in London. I think it's the first time and probably the only time in my life that you actually get offered the part in the meeting. I love the way he manages to, he'll always look at the scene, and if it looks a bit eggy or whatever, sometimes on the page it looks like it's right, and then when you're actually in the room, it all feels a bit stagnant or doesn't seem right, and he's always up for asking you what you think, whether it feels real to you. But I really like the way he works. It's amazing, really. And he's such a, he's a legend here, isn't he? And in cinema generally. And also Sean Bobbitt, who's doing the camera work, who did Hunger and Shame. It's always nice. That makes you look good, working with these sorts of people. And it's quite unusual to get scripts where, the leads are two women, and the men in it sort of play a part in their lives rather than, them being the love interest or something like that, When you're working with someone that's done so much, you're in safe hands, that person knows what they're doing, and also, it's exciting to then work with somebody whose films you've really enjoyed watching or something like that, which is really a lucky thing as an actor. There's always in time certain styles or subjects that become very popular for a period of time. And I think this is, we're not friendly vampires, which is quite a popular idea these days. But I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something to do with society now, or the insecurity that everyone's living in, the idea that these guys can live forever and invincible and don't suffer any of the problems that everyone else is facing at the moment or something.
Yeah, I'm the audience in a way, I suppose, when it comes to how I see this world or how I react to it. And when it comes down to it, it is just love that they're both searching for. It's a very common story. It's one that practically anyone can relate to. I think the audience is going to watch it and want to be a part of this world, find themselves in all of these characters. We have a beautiful cast, so I think it's going to be easy to do that. This was a brilliant opportunity to share the truth with someone else. I found that in this script, and I know that Neil was going to do it. So there wasn't any problem. I had to be a part of it. I guess the biggest one is presenting cancer in an honest way is the most fearing thing about this project. That and love. How can I make this honest? How can we make this honest? I think you have to. I mean, I'm young, I'm foolish, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I don't think you can escape yourself in any character that you do. I think it'll always be there to some extent. Otherwise, how do you relate in any way if it's not yourself as well? Frank, could have given up by now if it was me. He might not still be trying. I'm not quite as strong as Frank in some ways, and yet he's quite the weak individual at the same time, and very much like myself in other ways. Death is something that humans have been trying to figure out a way, I mean, we've been trying to escape it for a long time, so it makes sense that vampires are such a worldly commodity in today's market, it makes sense. There's something very interesting about it as well, it's mysterious. I fell in love with Frank very quickly, and I was really enjoying kind of believing in him and being him on the streets, in Los Angeles and inside the stores, and I really fell in love with Frank. And his story is such an important one.
I was sent a script. Stephen Woolley, my producer that I worked with years ago, sent me the script, and he developed it from Maura's play, Maura Buffini's play, and the script was absolutely intriguing, but it wasn't quite a vampire story, it wasn't quite a horror movie, and but there were so many elements from different movies I'd made myself. It was set in an abandoned seaside town, it was about a mother and daughter, it was about a young girl trying to tell her story, and the story was seen by viewed through the eyes of different people, and there was something absolutely intriguing there, but it was, it could have been a different movie than the movie we made if somebody else had directed it, perhaps, But I just felt there was something there that was begging to come out, which was a horror film or a vampire film, really, And I said to Maura, look, don't be afraid of the traditional elements of the genre, And she went away for a bit, and she came back, and she came up with a beautiful idea that everybody who reads Eleanor's story has to be killed. Because the minute the truth is out, the mother and daughter are in mortal danger because of the brotherhood that are pursuing them and stuff like that, So, and we introduced more blood and decapitations and fountains of waterfalls of blood and all sorts of stuff, and it became what it is now. There are so many vampire movies that have been made. People are just tired, and it's impossible to still that yawn that people would have about it. You know what I mean? It's like, but there was interesting enough material there that made it worth taking the chance to do it, really. And there was also the opportunity to redesign the vampire in a way, and to redesign the rules, to rewrite the catechism, if it is a catechism, they can see themselves in mirrors, they can walk around in the daylight, they don't have to have teeth, they can have a thumb that comes out, which is a much more useful device if you were a vampire, isn't it, really? And, the only thing common they have with traditional vampires is that they must survive in human blood, and that they live beyond the normal span, really, Gemma had read it, she liked it when I read it, and I met her, we talked about it, we talked about what it could be, and we agreed very rapidly that we wanted to work together. She's extraordinary talent, Gemma, I think, she's more like a kind of Greek or Italian kind of presence than an English presence, isn't she, And Saoirse I'd loved Saoirse's work for years, and she read it too, and she loved it, and she wants to get involved, you know. So it was fascinating. You had these two actors playing mother and daughter, who had this totally contrasting kind of, you know, energy, physical energy and emotional energy. You know, and one was all quietude and all watchfulness, the other was all dynamism and sexuality. You know, it was cool. It was good. Well, I tell you what happened was that I'd cast Gemma, I'd cast Caleb Landry-Jones, and I'd cast Saoirse, and I think I'd cast Sam and Johnny, and the money kept falling through, you know. So everyone would clear that. I was doing the boards at the time. I had to say, okay, I'm not going to supervise I had to get someone else to do that, and to commit to Byzantium. But the finance kept falling through. So eventually, I just said, look, let's just meet for 3 days in Soho, and let's rehearse this thing. Let's read through it and see is there anything there, even if we never get to do the movie. You know, at least we'd have some memory of it. You know, so we met and began to rehearse, and I began to shoot them with a little video camera, and it began to take on some life, you know, and then lo and behold, the money happened, so we were ready to go.
So Stephen Woolley's daughter's friend was in a production of a vampire story that they were doing down near Bath, and he went to see it with his daughter and phoned up my agent the next morning and asked if I wanted to turn it into a film. And I was thinking, God, wow, that's fantastic. You don't get an offer like that every day. But I was also thinking, the play was so theatrical. I thought, is it possible? Can it be turned into a film? It had all sorts of theatrical conventions that were very, very uncinematic. But actually, just talking more and more to Stephen about it, I thought, yeah, the story, actually, the essential story is so strong, this will make a good film. It took quite a long time to get the script in a really decent state. And then Stephen showed it to Neil, and we sort of went on from there, really. This sort of history of the Gothic in Stephen and Neil's work, and of taking myths and doing something quite unusual and different with them. And I think this story appealed to both of them for those reasons. And I just think they're the perfect team for it, really. I mean, I'd originally taken what Byron and Polidori wrote and had the vampires sort of originating in kind of, well, I suppose Greece, Turkey, Asia Minor, as it used to be called. And that's where the kind of the name Byzantium originated from. It came up that we were going to film the film here in Ireland, and I was quite troubled by that, and I thought, but Ireland has no, to my knowledge, no vampire mythology. And I sort of said, Neil, I'm really up for this, I'm really open to this, but where's the mythology? And Neil knows his Irish mythology inside out, upside down. And he emailed me with great stories about the kind of Neolithic tombs that they found up in Antrim with human skeletons with their heads cut off, faces turned into the ground, and big stones over their chests to obviously stop the dead from rising. And you kind of think, this is such a fundamental human fear. I don't know, these are vampires from a cold, harsh place. I think it's given it quite a unique sort of feel. The story is of two young women, Clara and Eleanor, and they are fleeing a crime. Clara has killed somebody and they flee. And they turn up in a small coastal town. They have no money, they have no link with anything, and they try and survive in this town. It's a story about two strangers in a small town. Only Clara and Eleanor are vampires, and they've been around together for 200 years. It transpires that Clara is Eleanor's mother. In order to save her child from death, she made her into a vampire, and they've travelled together for the last 200 years. So really the story is about what is it like spending 200 years with your mum. They're stuck at the ages they are as well, like Eleanor is forever 16, and I think that's quite a tough age to be stuck at, that you're neither an adult quite, and you're certainly no longer a child, but you're in this sort of kind of strange halfway place, stuck for time. I think there is a feeling very, very strongly in Eleanor that nothing ever changes, and the film is about how things ultimately do change for these girls. Clara's utterly ruthless, utterly doesn't care who she kills, doesn't, you know, absolutely, she's got no compunction at all. She would just kill anyone. She especially likes killing people who are, you know, perhaps not altogether moral. She's kind of prey turned predator, if you like. That's how Clara gets by. Eleanor, I think, struggles much more with the moral predicament of having to survive. How do you survive when it means that someone else must die? So she preys upon the very old and people. She seems to be incredibly good at finding people who are ready to go and who want to go painlessly. And she's, in a way, Eleanor's the angel of death. They've always survived on the fringes of society. They're not like vampires who have amassed great wealth, who were, you know, from a class background to start off with, and it really is how they sort of survive at the bottom of the pile. Myths are so endlessly reinterpretable, and they're there to be played with and reinvented. And I really admire other people's vampire stories, but what I really wanted to do with my own was to place it very much in a real world. And I went right back to the very, very early vampire stories, the Byron fragment, Augustus Darville, and then John Polidori's story called The Vampire. And there's another fantastic one by Sheridan Le Fanu called Carmilla, which is the first female vampire story. It's a marvellous story. And these vampires, they kind of don't sleep in coffins during the day. They don't have pointy fangs. They're not physically sort of Nosferatu monsters. They are invisible to the rest of, they are just like us. They move through society and they're impossible to spot. They're just like us. And I thought these really, really early Gothic vampires were incredibly interesting. And it was wanting to do something much more in that vein of having this sort of invisible vampire that really interested me. And also the fact that there are so few of them. And I think in vampire stories now, worlds are created where there are lots and lots of vampires. And I thought in this story, to make them very, very alone, that it takes 200 years for any other of their kind to catch up with them. During the course of the film, Eleanor meets Frank, and she sort of makes this link across the great chasm between her and everyone else. And it's this young man, Frank, and I think Eleanor is drawn to Frank because Frank's up close to his own mortality too. Frank has been and is very ill. And I think what draws her to him is how alive he is. I think it's the life in Frank that draws her to him. You know, love always changes everything. And sure enough, it does. It changes Eleanor's situation and her world. Clara, as a 14-year-old girl, is violated, and her future is destroyed at 14 years of age. And to her, becoming a vampire is actually salvation from this life. It's not damnation. As she sees it, it's salvation. She says, I think I spent my whole existence waiting for this moment. Clara, once she becomes a vampire, everything becomes right. For the first time in her life, she has the power. For Eleanor, it's a much more difficult existence, but it does make her the ultimate survivor. Noel and Frank, I mean, they're utterly decent people. You know, they're really good people. And I think the way that Clara treats Noel and the way that Eleanor treats Frank just shows up the differences even more between Clara and Eleanor. Clara shamelessly uses Noel, shamelessly uses him. And Eleanor passionately cares about Frank. You know, there are really bad men in this story, but it's really important that there are also really good men in this story. Not everybody's riven. The way we devour everything, the way we consume everything. I think vampires might be popular. I don't know, that they're becoming more and more human. We're letting them off the hook more and more. We're not scared of them anymore. They're not kind of these monstrous figures that they were. Even when I was a child, I think I was terrified of vampires. My daughter, who's sort of, you know, kind of 10, is now beginning to watch the sort of Twilight, and where vampires are the heroes. They're not villains, they're heroes. I think it's so interesting the way our fascination with them endures. That they used to be intelligent evil, now they're almost, you know, that the young man in Twilight, he's almost angelic. I think it's really strange and interesting how we have begun to twist them from bad to good. And I think it's that thing of, yeah, maybe we need the thing that devours us, just to keep us in line.
So I've kind of always had a fascination for horror and for the genre. But weirdly, since I've started producing for the last 10 years, I've not really produced a horror film. And I felt this terrible kind of lack of something. And so I've been searching for a good horror story, a good supernatural story, a ghost story. I saw a play that my daughter was supposed to be in, which was called A Vampire Story. I live between Bath and Bristol, and my eldest daughter Edith has been part of the theatre group there, the Bristol Young Vic, the Bristol Youth Theatre at the Bristol Old Vic. And she was due to be the lead in a play called Vampire Story, which we couldn't let her do because she was doing her exams. And she was also in the school play, so she chose the school play and didn't do this, but dragged me along to see it because all of her friends were in it. And I really was impressed by the play. It was written for teenagers, for older teenagers. But what I really liked was this notion of the mother-daughter vampire thing. Vampires traditionally, in the kind of history of vampire films, are predominantly males. They are the Bram Stoker Dracula character. They are the Nosferatu character in F.W. Murnau's film. They are always males who use women as victims. There is always a very strong sexual element between the kind of the sort of male seducer, right through to the Christopher Lee films and the Hammer movies. There's always the women are generally treated as either sex objects or victims. So what was interesting about the play was not only that the girls were similar ages, but also that they themselves were the dominant characters. They were feeding off people, and that was almost a kind of role reversal from the usual vampire films. There had been two other films that were like this. There was a film called Daughters of Darkness, an old Belgian film made in 1970, which had Delphine Seyrig, who was a classic French actress, who was a main protagonist with a female companion. And there's been one or two other pictures, but generally in literature and in film, the one has the male vampire as the main protagonist. So this was interesting. I like the idea of the two females, and I also love the idea that they were mother-daughter. That was something which, again, I'd not come across. The play itself didn't really have the same drama that the film script has, and really, when I approached Moira 3 or 4 years ago, she had a couple of film projects. One was Tomorrow Drew, which was either in the process of shooting. Yeah, it was actually not in the process of shooting, it was in pre-production. They were trying to put the finance together for Tomorrow Drew. She was also involved in the script for Jane Eyre. She had a play that she was writing for the National, plus a play that was going to New York as well. So I was kind of like trying to fit her project into the middle of all that. and she was a little resistant to begin with and couldn't see how it could be a film. And then I talked a little bit about what I liked about the play and what I thought could be filmic and cinematic. So she took some of those ideas on board, and we embarked on the development process. Obviously, having made, as I said earlier, Interview of the Vampire and Company of Wolves, I knew Neil also had a fascination for this kind of material. So I was just talking to Neil, who was in London, we were talking about other projects, and I told him I had this script, and would he be interested in reading it? And he did, and he loved it. We had very keen on Saoirse and Gemma, and Neil was very keen on them as well. They became kind of material to the whole process as well, that they came on very, very fast. And Neil worked with Moira on fashioning it for him. And that was a very good relationship and a very good process as well. It's, you know, every film has a different life and a different sort of pre-life. Most people making films, who are kind of the majority of crew on a film, believe that the film begins and ends at, when you say, you know, day one to the end of the film. But films have a huge life beforehand. I can't think of a movie other than The Crying Game where I've had to deal with so much of the process of making a film, where it just seems so many obstacles are thrown our way in terms of how do we get from the next day to the next day to the next day. And that's been both encouraging, because that's probably the most successful film I produced in terms of the size of budget to its US and world gross and the prestigious nature of it, with Oscar nominations and Oscar wins and things. And it's also rather scary that a project that you love so much is seen to be a difficult film. You know, the challenge really for us in this film has been to overcome the sort of vampire tag. In that process of the 4 years of working with Moira on the script, they released Twilight. There's been successful TV shows, The True Blood. There's been countless vampire films. Let the Right One In, another example, which, you know, have set up for us a little bit of a problem. Our film is very different from those films, and is completely in another world. It has connotations of Twilight. There's definitely a young characters who have a kind of teenage love affair, which is kind of slightly like Twilight. It's also similar to Let the Right One In as much as it's kind of much more of a realistic setting. It's not in the court or in the castle of Count Dracula. It's in very much ordinary seaside towns and places, although it does have flashbacks from our grandiose historical past. So there are similarities with those films, there's similarities with True Blood and those kind of TV vampire shows, because they're real people, and it eschews the garlic cross Bram Stoker Dracula, referring as it does back to a sort of Byron, Sheridan Le Fanu era of vampires being immune to light and don't need to lie in coffins and all those sorts of things. So it has connections with those, and yet it's uniquely different. And I think the originality comes from Moira's writing, and stems, I think, as well from the perspective of being about a much more female dilemma, about an adolescent girl's dilemma, about a woman who is born into a world which she has had to, she's been a slave to men in, a world that she's angry about. You know, the anger that Clara feels against the world and against specifically men in the world is not something that Eleanor shares. Eleanor is a younger, more innocent character. So they're always pulling apart as people, although what connects them is mother and daughter. So the blood connects them. They need as far as they're aware, they're the only people out there, or certainly as far as Eleanor is aware, they're the only people out there that are of their kind. So they need each other desperately. And the mother and daughter bond is strong, but their personalities and their instincts are completely different. And that's what makes that coupling so intriguing and so enjoyable. It's a great character study as much as anything else, and I think that's really what makes it into a movie as opposed to simply a gimmicky vampire concept. For both of them, it's a last hope to survive as something, not as humans, but as something. And it's really, at that point of death, what they're thinking and what they are, and that's what they will remain forever. What I think the film shows is that the drama around them forces them into change, and that's really what's, I hope, the satisfaction of the film, is that they are, by the end of the film, not the same characters they were at the beginning, that there has incredibly been a change. I think the fascination with vampires is that you get to live forever, and that's something we all would love to, a journey we'd all love to go on. Whether or not, if you think it's really a great thing to be living off of the blood of other people in order to enable that. You know, there's something also very sexy about that you're seducing or being seduced by a vampire. There's also been something much more erotic than the old horror myths of Frankenstein or the werewolf or any of those things where you're not being killed, you're being seduced, and if you're lucky enough, the vampire will take you with him. What's kept the myth going is that there's something very cinematic about living forever and not being able to die, that you can do things and create things and be, in a way, immortal, and that makes for great moments in films where you're walking and into accidents and jumping off buildings, and you are standing up and walking away from it, and that's also something that we would all love to be able to think we could do. Immortality is a very seductive notion.
I think what's surprising and fresh and new about this is I don't believe that we've seen a mother and daughter vampire story where one of the girls wants to get out of the vampire business. I think that's a really extraordinary and unusual scenario, and brings a real freshness to it. I mean, there are many of those vampire references that you'd expect are there, and clearly the reason for making a vampire movie is to embrace those elements. But within that, there's a very fresh and new path being set out for us, which I think an audience is going to really respond to. We have an amazing cast. The two girls, Gemma and Saoirse, are second to none. Saoirse, being from Dublin as I am, and she being Irish, it's really exciting to watch her career grow, and so actually to get to work with her. I haven't worked with her before, so it's really, it's great just to be able to sit in the same room as her and watch her work. And Gemma is just fantastic. I mean, she's so beautiful and smart, and there's something really exciting about the two of them together. So it's great. One of the really attractive bits for me is getting to work with Stephen and Neil again. And Neil and I did Breakfast and Pluto together, which was a wonderful film. And to get to do a vampire movie with the guys who made Interview with a Vampire, for me, I'm getting a bit of a kick out of that. It's quite an exciting thing to do. So it's a very seductive genre for cinema, as is documented by its illustrious past. I mean, there's so many great movies that have been made, but Neil has in this genre, Company of Wolves is a werewolf story, but nonetheless there's a you know, there's a relationship, they're cousins, so to speak. So, you know, there's the company Wolves and Interview with the Vampire. Now this does, you know, that makes a certain amount of sense. There's almost a sexuality to what we see on screen. I mean, it is a very seductive act, if you like, and so that, you know, that the vampire must feed off another human being to exist, and that allows them to exist into eternity, and the trade-offs that go with that is from a dramatic point of view just really inviting and exciting, and so I don't think we'll ever tire of that.
Reading the script initially, I felt that a very naturalistic approach would aid in the storytelling, because we really want people to believe that these are people. They have become vampires, but they did exist, and they do exist, and they live in the world that we live in. So it was really from that basis. And then speaking to Neil about that as well, it seemed to be the right way to go. Initially, we thought that we would differentiate the different time periods by shooting the contemporary material on a digital format, and then to show the difference, and hopefully in a really subtle way, we would shoot all of the sort of flashback material on film itself. But as we tested the Alexa, the Arri Alexa camera, which we're using, tested that against film, it kind of became apparent that it wasn't necessary, and that we couldn't get that much of a differentiation between the two. So it actually just made sense to shoot it on the Alexa, and then when we go through to the final grade, we'll put a different look onto the two. So, and that, you know, amazed me. I thought that there would be a discernible difference between the film stock and the digital camera, but it was remarkably similar. By utilizing the sort of existing light, the natural light that exists on each of the locations, and a lot of it is location based, there's very little of it is studio based, just sort of going in while surveying the locations, looking at what the light really was, how it felt, and then using that as a touchstone to lead me in the direction of lighting each individual scene. So, you know, we use a lot of light coming in through windows, a lot of light from practicals, so that it's not a stylized lighting. It's something that you would expect to see in those locations. It's maybe slightly heightened in places, but ostensibly is naturalistic. Although we might be using certain aspects of verite in terms of available light and the like, compositionally it is very, how would you say, it's very considered. You know, we're sort of placing the characters within the frame, as opposed to the frame being pushed around by the characters themselves. It's such a joy to have, you know, the opportunity to work with someone like Neil Jordan. I mean, I've admired his films all my life. And when we first spoke on the phone, I couldn't believe, you know, that I was actually talking to Neil. And one of his many strengths is he is very, very visual, and he knows how a camera works and how a lens works, and compositionally what is good and what isn't, and has a fantastic imagination, and inventiveness, and a curiosity about the frame that is really inspiring. And has been a lot of fun to work with. What excites me about this film is its sheer scale. You know, we go from the 18th century through to contemporary times. We have a love story. We have heads being ripped off. We have unique vampires. And the way in which the story is told is incredibly complex, with the narration being presented by the different characters in different ways at different times. But by the end of it, it all winds up very nicely, and so you have all these things going on, and at the end of it, a very satisfying narrative. I think all good horror films have an element of humor to them. You need that release. Those that are just pure horror, to me, I lose interest in after a while, unless they're really very well done. So it's sort of you're hoping for a black humor in there. Not that it becomes in any way camp, but surprisingly funny in places to help alleviate, what are some very, very brutal scenes. Every film is unique. Every film has their own challenges, and this one certainly has had it. It's winter. We're in Ireland. We have so far been blessed by the weather, but every morning I wake up and look out the window. I'm not sure what I'm going to see. The whole chase scene was, discussed in some detail in advance. But Neil is he's a very intuitive filmmaker. And so until we were actually there and saw it, we made sure we had the tools available to do what we thought we wanted to do. And then on the night and in the locations, found what we thought were the best shots to make the sequence work.
I'm going to start off with Stephen, because it's actually your daughter who actually pointed you to the direction of the play that Moira Buffini wrote called A Vampire Story, which was written in 2008 and was played in a lot of schools around the world.
Yeah, the origins were, it was a play that Moira had written for teenagers. And my daughter was doing her GCSEs and she was supposed to be in the play, but she was also in the school play, so we said, you do one or the other. And she dragged us along to see it, because all of her mates were in it. And Neil and I, of course, many, many years ago, I was lucky enough to produce Company of Wolves, which was my first movie. And I've been always wanting to do a film like that ever since. And I love the play. I love the idea of the play, of the mother-daughter vampire relationship. I hadn't sort of seen that before, and I sort of spoke to Moira about it. And that's how it sort of began.
I thought it was a no-brainer that you could just immediately go to Neil and ask him to do it after an interview with a vampire. But it actually wasn't quite as simple as that. You actually didn't.
No, it worked. It was very hard for Moira to think about it as something not, as writers they do one thing and that's what they think it is. So it's quite hard to work with her to bring it out to be something else, keeping the mother-daughter relationship. And so it took a couple of years to get a script that we both really liked. And at that point, I was having dinner with Neil in London and just mentioned to him that we'd been working on the script. Would you like to see it? So it was weirdly coincidental.
And you wanted to do it, why?
Because I liked the script a lot, actually. It was very strange reading. There were so many things in it that were familiar to me from the movies, and the thing that I was most worried about actually was the fact that it was a vampire story. I love the mother-daughter relationship. I love the fact that it was about a girl who was trying to tell a story for 200 years. I love the weird, messed up abandoned seaside town. But I was going, vampires, like to slay them, and it's like, how can we do this stuff? But I met with Moira and we talked about it, and she was a bit afraid of making it into a generic movie at the time, and I remember saying to her, you can't be afraid of the fact that this is a vampire film. You can't pretend this is not what they are, let's just try and go for the, I don't mean make it a gross-out horror movie, but, make it part of the genre. These people kill people, and there's blood there, and there is all this. Because in the first script, I think you read the first script, did you?
Yeah.
You weren't sure whether it was all in Eleanor's mind or not, something, yeah. It's quite ambiguous. And she came up with this concept, basically, that everybody who reads the story that Eleanor tells, because it's forbidden, they will be killed. Yeah, which I thought that's a great structure for a movie, you know. She came up with another draft that was quite different, but it was the essence of it was there, you know. So that's why I did it, because I like the script so much.
And you both thought of Gemma the moment you read it, and you went over to see her when she was filming Hansel and Gretel, and she was trying to convince them. So
yeah.
Why did
I
you
thought
think?
she liked it.
I
Did you
didn't
not like
think
it?
convince me.
She liked
So-
it. I was told she
I was
liked it.
like
That's why I went.
desperate to do.
And for what reason, though, Gemma? I mean, what did you see? I mean, you liked the fact, I remember you telling me about the revolutionary side of it, and you see them as like quite revolutionary figures.
Yeah, there were many reasons. I like the sort of feminist take, and I felt like, well, this is the sort of style of movie that I really enjoy, and it did remind me of the early Neil Jordan films, and yeah, and I thought it was unusual to see a mother-daughter in this light. There were many reasons why I wanted to do this film, and I just loved the script. I thought it was very intriguing.
And Saoirse, from your point of view, I mean, and working with Gemma as well, getting that bond and that dynamic between you as like a mother and daughter.
I think that just kind of came very naturally, you know. I mean, I was saying earlier, and it kind of, I haven't really thought about it before, but I think that when when two people or a group of people, when a few people have the same sense of humour, I think it really makes a difference to the dynamic of the group and the relationship that you have with the other cast members. And we kind of got on straight away because we had a laugh with each other, and Sam was the same. And so that was really lovely. So going into a film like this, like Neil said, I mean, I was a bit worried when I heard it was a vampire film, because there has been so much done recently in the one sort of style, and if it was going to be about suppliants or, you know, bloodthirsty immortals, it needed to be told in a different way, whether that be visually or through the story. And with this, it was kind of both. It was visually, I think it was going back to the original kind of gothic vampire tale, which was fantastic, because we haven't seen that in so long, you know, and that's something that Neil is so good at and has always been fantastic at. And so that's why I was really interested in it, because I knew that I could trust Neil with it. I wanted to work with Neil. I loved the script, I loved the cast, and it was going to be shot in Ireland as well. It meant to bring my dog up to Dublin.
Well, it wasn't meant to be shot in Ireland, actually.
No, but eventually it was. And then I remember when you told me, I mean, I was already signed up to do it, but I remember you called me up and said, oh, I was thinking that Eleanor should be a fantastic piano player, and so I think you should take piano lessons. And then I was like completely into it, because I had always wanted to do that, and I felt like, you know, just a few weeks before we started rehearsals, everything was really coming together really well. So.
Because you added the whole Irish sacrament bit, going to the island.
No, it was very complicated, because you know what I'm saying. No, well, I'm not going to be rude. No, but it's originally, what Maura wrote was the way you get turned into a vampire is you go and you join and you fight Napoleon, and you end up on some beach in Turkey or Asia Minor, and you wander among ruins, and you're bitten by an enormous bird. Or you're bitten by a snake, which is held by an enormous bird and drops the snake on you, and it bites you, and you're now a vampire. The money fell through, and we couldn't afford to go to Morocco, which we had found these wonderful locations in the desert south of Ouazzazate, and we couldn't afford to go there. And I said to Maura, just look into the Irish stuff like this, and then it became more interesting in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just we invented this weird waterfall business and this strange hut that you go into where you meet a version of yourself, you know. So
It was more like folklore then, wasn't it?
kind of. Well, I call it the first historically accurate vampire movie, actually. all the others are false. They're all false.
But that's something, because I remember you mentioned to me that you actually read on the set, that you thought that's a good thing.
Yeah, Moira's very, I mean, she's such a literate, she loves literature, and she loves getting all that stuff in there.
Because you did Tamara Drew with her. I mean, did she mention this to you when you were actually making it?
Yes, I remember now she did. We were having dinner we shot Tamara during Dorset, and we were all having dinner together, and she said, I said, what are you doing at the moment? And she said, I'm writing a vampire film. And I went, what are you doing that for? Like, I just couldn't imagine her doing something like that, and I didn't know about her play. And she said it, and I sort of laughed at it. It's so bad. But and then I read it, you know, it's brilliant. It's great.
And you're a particularly good director of women.
Of women?
Yes.
Really? Yes. Oh my God. No, I'll do it again. I'd love to, yeah. If somebody offers me a script, or a script that I haven't written, I quite selfishly write a draft of it myself. You know, in this case, I said to Maura I wouldn't do that because the voice was so specific. Even though the story changed, you know, the way in which Eleanor told her story in this 18th century way. Even the last line she says, what did she say? Never will I tell it more. Yeah, I've never written that, you know. I'll never tell it again. I will tell it never more or something. But she said, never will I tell it more. I go, okay. She knows where this girl is. She knows the 18th century way of, you know, whatever. Books. They did write books then, didn't they?
And Saoirse, Caleb Landry Jones, I mean, your relationship with Frank, I mean, it was great. I mean, it's so touching. And I just thought, you know, did you work? I mean, he's a particularly unusual actor anyway. I think if you've seen Antiviral and Last Exorcism, so I think that, you know, working with him.
Yeah, it was an experience. It was special because Caleb is somebody who really throws himself into a character, and I know that from what we've done with him and just what other people have done with him as well. He really, really cares about what he does, you know. And so I think to take a role like that, to just be the love interest of one of the central characters and turn that into a boy who's very, very interesting and really gives a fantastic performance is brilliant, you know, and that shows how good an actor he is. So
he's one of those actors who's no defense against the role. You know, he kind of sleep in the bed that the character sleeps in. That room that that we shot in, where the solar panel was painted on the ceiling. That's actually a house I used to live in. You know, and Caleb moved into that room and lived there. Actually, my mate lived in the room. He couldn't get rid of him. The house, you know. So he's that kind of guy, isn't he? He's got no defenses against the part. He suffers the entire part, and then when it's over, something different happens, which is great. As a director, it's great to have something like that. Well, after Interview the Vampire, Warner Brothers asked me to write a script based on her next novel, The Vampire Lestat. And I wrote it, you know, and I had a blast doing that. It was wonderful, you know, but, you know, Tom Cruise never does sequels, and it would be difficult to get the two. Yeah, beyond that, didn't he? You know, yeah. You're right.
He's done like 4 of those.
I know, he was kind of big.
Right, okay.
Anyway, he didn't want to do a sequel to this. He didn't want to do a character. And so I had a blast doing that, but then I kind of forgot, you know. And then the whole Twilight thing happened, which was really strange, you know. I mean, Catherine Hardwicke is a good director, you know. I actually saw the first Twilight movie, and I thought, okay, I can understand this. You know, they've turned the vampire thing into a teen love story where they only kiss and they never have sex and stuff. It's like, okay, I get it in a way, you know what I mean? But beyond that, I don't understand the phenomenon at all. And I think audiences would be forgiven for throwing their eyes to heaven and saying, not another vampire movie, please. There's something in the genre, and there's something in the metaphor, and there's something in the mythology that is compulsive, you know? And maybe the reason it's been so prevalent for the last 10 years is because audiences want something other than realism, you know what I mean? And they want some sense of myth and fantasy, you know? That's all I'm going to say about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have to say that I drew a lot on my own experience with my mum and my sister, because I have a kind of similar relationship with my mother. She's more like my sister, and I mother my sister. So I sort of had a mixture of both of those elements, and I very much was inspired by both those relationships with the Eleanor relationship. the protectiveness that I felt from my mum at the same time is that there's one scene where I say, I know I won't get your respect. And I remember my mum saying that exact line to me once when I was looking disapprovingly at her. And yeah, so I drew from, it kind of came naturally, even though it was a strange relationship, it came naturally to me because of my own experience.
No, not at all. No. I mean, this whole thing was influenced by the script. You know, the possibility of the script and all of that imagery by the sea and by the beach was to do with Eleanor's memories, you know, and the idea of a young girl trying to remember the past. I mean, the script gave this lovely irony because when they came to the town, she remembered everything and she remembered nothing. Do you understand what I mean? So it was this lovely thing, and you can play with the sense of memory, and there's nothing better for that than crashing waves and beaches, and you know, it's like. And I have to say, the bloody waterfall, yeah, was actually suggested by the designer of the film, Simon Elliott. You know, we went to this extraordinary waterfall that's close to a house I have in the southwest of Ireland, and Simon said, you know, we can turn that red if you want. He says, you just pour in all this dye, and I go, wow, okay, that's amazing. Let's do that. You know, so that's sometimes these things just.
There was
happen,
in the original script there was a statue that bled.
Oh, that's right. That's
There's
right.
a statue
Yeah.
with bled red tears.
Yeah.
So it began with gushing red tears.
Oh, you're
and
right.
Then
Yeah.
it became waterfall. And that's
So you actually did that for real? I would have thought
We did it. That's the awful thing. We did
CGI.
it for real. We had climbers up there.
Oh yeah, we did
buckets
it
of
for real.
dye. She got underneath it. I mean, you couldn't do that shot with her underneath that waterfall if it wasn't
That's
real,
true.
you know. Yeah. So we did it.
it was freezing cold, and it was Gemma was incredible. All of us stood there completely aghast that she could actually take the pressure of the water on her head.
Now, when she did that jump, it was just amazing. I'm going to jump that in the summer.
That was Neil doing the
I
jump.
dare you.
I did a Scottish accent years ago when I was doing about Harry Houdini, and I haven't done it since, but I'm hopefully playing Mary Queen of Scots at the end of the year, and hopefully, I hope you're all alright with that. I love it more than any other accent that I've ever done, so.
You know, this is my favourite genre, you know, that mix of reality and fantasy, and I mean, this is perfect for my sensibility, like a dirty, crappy seaside town with magical creatures stuck in it. I'd also like to make a love story sometimes, but I should never ever be allowed to make comedies.
Actually, there was a book I tried to buy a few years ago, which I always thought would be perfect for Neil.
What's it called?
It's called Bareback. And, has anybody read that yet? Oh wow,
Yes.
it's an amazing book, isn't it?
Yeah, the female pop one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, really good, and I always thought, God, I could get that book perfect for Neil. And unfortunately, I lost out. It was about 7 or 8 years ago. But I'm thinking that the big major studio who bought it haven't made it. So I'm keeping quiet about it. But yeah, no, I'd love to do something in that genre, and that was one of the best female roles I've ever read for a movie. Yeah. Brilliant.
Well, listen, that's going to be about it. I mean, thank you so much, guys. I'm so glad you liked it. The film opens on May the 10th. If you want to go and see it again, please go again. For the time being, thank you, Neil, Gemma, Saoirse, and Steve.